All right, everybody, welcome back to Chapter 3 of the California Laws and Regulations. I hate to disappoint, I'm not going to go over all of this chapter. I'm just going to touch on a few things here. I think it's important for anyone watching this, if you are studying for these tests, to read this chapter yourself. It's pretty dense and there's a lot to it, so I think it's better if you just read it and figure it out. It more so just goes over certifications and licenses and all the different types and all the different requirements for it. It's pretty repetitive, but it's not too hard to understand. And if I get enough people asking me to make this one, then I'll go back through and I'll make it. But for now, I'm just going to touch on a few things here. So let's get into it. All right, so the first piece of certification, we're going to talk about the Qualified Applicator Certificate, or QAC. The requirements to attain the license or certificate: you must pass the core exam on laws, regulations, and basic principles, and at least one pest control category examination before being issued an initial QAC. Activities allowed under the license or certificate. The certificate is typically used by those that work for a business but are not the designated qualified person, or used by individuals that work for their employer on their employer's property. They are also not required to register with the CAC. So one thing about the QAC, which is different from the QAL, is that the QAL is allowed to be the designated qualified person for a pest control business, meaning they can supervise the use of restricted materials, and employees who are, well, the QAC can do that as well, but more so the ongoings of a pest control business and the requirements for use records, pretty much everything that goes into a pest control business. They are the responsible person. Whereas the QAC, you can supervise restricted material usage and so on, but you can't supervise a pest control business. So the requirements to maintain the license or certificate are 20 hours of continuing ed with at least 4 hours in laws and regulations. The reasons for denying, revoking, or suspending the license or certificate: supervising a pest control business, which they are not allowed to do. Additionally, the book mentions that the maintenance, gardener, pest control subcategory Q are not authorized to purchase, supply, or supervise the application of restricted materials and are only allowed incidental use of pesticides. Lastly, the DPR can deny an application and revoke or suspend a QAC for the following reasons: failure to adequately supervise the use of a restricted material, failing to comply with the laws and regulations relating to pesticides, or making false or fraudulent records or reports. We have the QAL. So currently I am a licensed qualified applicator, and the requirements to do that are similar to the QAC. You have to pass laws, regulations, and basic principles, and at least one pest control category examination. Additionally, the core exam has additional section pertaining to pest control businesses and running them, which is that additional step you need to be a QAL versus the QAC. Activities allowed under the license or certificate: an individual must possess a QAL if they intend to use or supervise the use of restricted use pesticides, restricted materials, and are not otherwise certified with a QAC or private applicator certificate, and will be the qualified person who is responsible for supervising the pest control operations of a licensed pest control business. Requirements to maintain the license or certificate: they do not need to register with the CAC. If they own a pest control business, they must register that business with the CAC annually. 20 hours of continuing education with 4 relating to laws and regulations. And that's different for the sewer line root control category and seed treatment pest control. Reasons for denying, revoking, or suspending the license or certificate. DPR can deny if you fail to comply with the laws and regulations relating to pesticides or make false or fraudulent records or reports. They will suspend or revoke your license. And failing to supervise the operations, activities, and employees of the business that ensures compliance with pesticide laws and regulations. Next, we have the Pest Control Advisor, the requirements to obtain the license or certificate. Firstly, the minimum qualifications. You must meet the minimum education and work qualifications listed in regulations and pass the core exam on laws, regulations, basic principles, and integrated pest management, along with one pest control category examination. People who are exempt from the PCA are officials of federal, state, and county departments of ag and University of California personnel. Activities allowed under the license or certificate. A valid PCA license must be possessed before an individual can do any of the following: provide pest control recommendations concerning any agricultural uses, offer themselves as an authority on any agricultural use, solicit services or sales for agricultural use, and they can only make recommendations in areas which they are licensed for, which is very important. That goes with the other categories as well. That is, they can only make the applications in areas which they are licensed for, not make recommendations. But requirements to maintain the license or certificate: they must register with the CAC of the counties they plan on working in, and they must complete a minimum of 40 hours with DPR approved courses with 4 hours in laws and regulations, which must be done every 2 years. Reasons for denying, revoking, or suspending the license or certificate: failing to put recommendations in writing, making false or fraudulent statements in written recommendations, violating any applicable state or federal law or regulation, or violating any regulation adopted by the CAC, failing to pass the core examination or failing to pass at least one category examination, making a recommendation in the category which they are not licensed, and unprofessional conduct. The last thing I wanted to touch on was the information required to be in a written recommendation from a pest control advisor. So the written recommendation is something provided by the pest control advisor to the county agricultural commissioner in regards to why they are doing the treatments that they are doing and all the information that goes behind those treatments and the need for pest control. So some things that should be included in a written recommendation are the name and dosage of each pesticide to be used or description of the pest control method, accepted common name of the pest to be controlled, operator of the property and location, acreage or other unit to be treated and its location, commodity, crop, or site to be treated, suggested schedule, time, or conditions for the pesticide application or other control methods, warning of the possibility of damages by the pesticide application that reasonably should not have been known by the agricultural pest control advisor to exist, total acres or units to be treated, concentration and volume per acre or other units, restricted entry interval if one has been established, and the pre-harvest or pre-slaughter interval. If the pesticide is a non-fumigant, high volatile organic compound product subject to restrictions, the exemption for use under Title 3 of CCR Section 6884B must be identified. So the specific exemption reason as to why they can use that VOC. A warning of the possibility of damages that are reasonable to exist, including but not limited to hazards, labeling restrictions on use, plant back, or disposition disposition of the treated commodity, byproducts, or treated area, criteria used for determining the need for the recommended treatment, certification that alternatives and mitigation measures that would substantially lessen any significant adverse impact on the environment have been considered, if feasible, adopt. So alternative feasible mitigation measures. And lastly, the signature or mark of the advisor's address, the date, and the name and address of the business the advisor represents. So yeah, some of the most important things I wanted to touch on here. I figure most of us are probably studying for the QAC, QAL, or PCA. If you guys want the rest of this, just let me know. I really feel that you probably should just go through it yourselves and read it and see what all of these are about. And yep, so move on to the next chapter. Thanks, guys.